brand new podcast. We're calling this podcast Straight Out of Politics. And today I am on location in LA/Compton. Today we're talking about class. So I kind of wanted to give a visual of how the poorest of the poor is living. I'm in LA. I think it's, how far are we from USC? We're 6 minutes from USC. So you have USC, you know, all these people with money, smack dab in the middle of depressed cities, of dilapidated cities, just run down cities. And it truly shows the difference in class that you can visually see just looking one way and then looking the other. So I am with one of my regular co-hosts, RJ. How you doing, RJ?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here on your new premiere for your show. So it's pretty good to join you.
Thanks. And he had a hand in the name. So Straight Out of Politics. I did have a different name, but I agree with him. I think I like this name even better. So yeah, I'm outside of that building now. I just kind of want to in the neighborhood. Oh, I'm sorry. I have Wi-Fi connections to walk around, so I won't go that. You'll be able to see closer so that it doesn't. You'll be able to see closer behind me. Let me get a little so you're able to see more of it. I won't go that far. But what I wanted to show you, maybe you can kind of see it in the background there, is just how this city is dilapidated. Closed down businesses. If you can see there, I don't know if you can see that. One glimmer of hope there, a church that they are renovating. But this is somebody's homeless encampment right here. You can see their sort of cart. They're not here, which is unusual for a homeless person to leave their cart that way. And then there's another one, like not even 10 feet, another person. But I'm not gonna bother her. She's eating, but she's there sitting under, a broken down. There we go, a broken down umbrella that she got out of the trash, and it's an elderly woman. She has to be black lady. She has to be in her 50s, and it's sad. Like, it's just sad. So I did want to kind of give you a glimpse of that because I happen to be where I'm at right now. And I'm not down here as often, but I did want to give you that visual. And then I'll go back in here in office and start this episode. So this episode is called, this podcast is now called Straight Out of Politics. And the reason for the name or for the title, the reason I picked this was, it's a lot of reasons. Like everything, a lot of people say, I'm not into politics. Like if you're into life and living and being happy, everything is politics to me. From the cost of your toothpaste to, the cost of rubbing alcohol to everything. Everything has a political point of view because almost everything has some sort of profit motive or a person or entity that's trying to make money in that way. So today's episode is about race being class and class is race. And the way I defined it, RJ, I'm going to pass it to you in just a second, just to get your introductory thoughts on the topic. So the reason, in my opinion, class is race and race is class is because of a tweet that was posted by the FHL account today. And that is so much of the determining factor that determines what class position you're in is is signified by your ethnicity, by your race. So, for example, when you're thinking of Black folks, for example, and you're saying they're in the lower class, let's say you say they're in the lower class, poverty class. What's the percentage of Black people in poverty? What's the percentage of Black people making, minimum a wage? So being Black puts you in the same class that being poor. So that's why it's my opinion that race is class, because all class is a category. Class doesn't necessarily always mean economics. It doesn't only mean economics. So it doesn't just mean you can be in a class system based off of your complexion, light versus dark. You can be in a class system versus your height, tall versus short. So in America, Black people are put into a particular class, and that class happens to be called Black. That's how I view it. So our class label is our race, but it's still a class. Your thoughts, RJ, on the topic broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a good start. The examples you give were valid. I mean, another example of what you described as class not always being about economics is in the Black community, it's colorism. Light skin versus dark skin versus medium skin. We kind of do that to each other and to ourselves. So overall, I think your argument that class isn't always about economics is true. I mean, in American politics, American history, race and class have always been tied closely together. If you're Black in America, you're most likely poor. And if you make it, you're the American dream. And so if you look at it from this perspective, if you're Black, the American dream is basically only applicable to 5% of the Black community, whilst the other 95%, you're really deemed as the opposite. It's just so difficult to really overcome those type of institutional barriers. And so that's why I do believe with your argument that class and race are pretty much entwined together. I mean, and that's my perspective on that. And the best way to fight back against it isn't necessarily to pander for one issue or the other, is to really fix the systemic issues of both and to punch at it for both.
Right. And to your point, that's my daughter's head sticking in there. Yeah, her name is Kaylani. So okay, sweetheart, we're gonna need you to.
It could be just like Rome. Rome brought his daughter on. Rome was doing his daughter's makeup while she was on stream too. So.
Okay, sweetheart, I'm gonna put you down. All right. Okay. All right. So anyway, this is what happens when you do live shows. So the point that I wanted to make was this, and that is stop, sweetheart. That is there was a tweet. So the FHL account put out a tweet today about this, and there was a person who responded, and I kind of wanted to talk about what this person said. This person responded by basically making this conservative point or this racist talking point that I've heard before, and that is, well, if class is race, then explain, Asian people. How come Asian people, are succeeding at higher rates than Black and brown people, indigenous people, and this point, one, it is a racist point, and there's a lot of things that's untrue about that. One, of course, every Asian person is not successful. Like, if you don't believe that, take a trip down to Long Beach, California, to Little Saigon or Little Cambodia, or Little Saigon is in Westminster, California. Little Cambodia in downtown Long Beach, where there's gangs. Like, it's so preposterous. But anyway, the other thing is class has many different levels. So just because one segment or one particular group of people of color are succeeding more than a different particular group, that doesn't prove or disprove that class isn't race. Because even within people of color, there's different levels of class. So, for example, this is the point that I made also. On the totem pole, most Americans would say, "Hey, Black people are some of the worst treated." But under that is Indigenous people. Indigenous people are even treated even worse than Black people. So my point being is that there is levels of classism or of class within even the oppressed population. So just because Asian people find a little more success in certain areas or in this racist system, it doesn't prove that class is not race. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I have to agree. I think it too in the Black community too. There's a lot of really bad discussions in terms of really the Black poor, the Black middle class, and the Black rich. I mean, a lot of times you see really the Black middle class kind of degrade the Black working class. He says, well, if you do what I did to get here, then you should be able to be where I'm at. And everyone's systemic situation is different. So not everyone's going to have the same, I would say, outcome that you believe someone should have, because the systemic issues are so deep. So, like, for instance, you could have someone who lives in the neighborhood you live in, right? That's Black and that's poor. You can have someone who works at CNN or MSNBC who represents the middle class, constantly preaching down at working class Black people, while at the same time being subservient to the Black bourgeoisie, like an Oprah or a Tyler Perry, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the problem with the Black community as a whole is that we're so fractured in a way that helps the establishment, because they can just pick off a few one of us to whatever is to their advantage. Like the Black bourgeoisie, in terms of like Tyler Perry and all these other elites, they're good for government. They represent the Congressional Black Caucus, but not really the working class poor or the middle class.
And to your point of the treatment between Black bourgeoisie, Black middle class, and the Black working class or poor, that is something that to me does stand out. Because I mean, you see it in our music. You hear it in our music. I mean, you see it in some of our our reality shows where poverty is stigmatized. Even in our rap, rappers are always talking about, I'm allergic to broke, I'm allergic to poor people, and it's the I'm being treated bad, I'm being treated poor, and once I break out of it, I'm going to go ahead and become my oppressor, or actually carry out some of the same sort of attributes, some of the same sort of traits as your oppressor against your own people. And Don Lemon is one that comes to mind. Sweetheart, Don Lemon is one that comes to mind that always punches down, especially when we're talking about Black people. Okay, it's not funny no more. So especially when we're talking about Black people punching down, Don Lemon is one that stands out. But another thing, how the Black bourgeoisie, you want to pop out? Another thing about the Black bourgeoisie is, I don't know if they're making these decisions consciously or they're drinking the Kool-Aid. Because imagine you're oppressed, RJ, or you are. But imagine you're under this oppressed state and you're able to get out. You so not want to go back to that oppressive state that you're willing to treat the people who you were among not too long ago badly, in order, because that fear of going back to that fear of dropping back into that oppressive state is so great that you're willing to do that. And I think that's the decision that a lot of Black bourgeoisie is just basically have made.
Well, it's called going from the oppressed to the oppressor.
Right.
Like look at Oprah, Tyler Perry, Steve Harvey, all of these really the black bourgeoisie. A lot of them started off just as poor as poor people today. The issue is once they made it out and the likelihood of you making it out and being as big as they are in terms of economics is extremely, extremely low. But they feel that the overall black community, they should make it out that very exact same way, which really isn't applicable. And so, for instance, since we brought it up, like look at the situation between Monique and Tyler Perry with her Netflix deal. Look at the situation when Monique was talking to Whoopi Goldberg. In all those different instances, they said, "Look, once you become big as a black person that's in the bourgeoisie, of course, I'm using this term. That's not what they said, but once you get to where you're at, you got to leave those folks alone. You just got to leave. You got to leave them alone." And so really what it does is it turns the black community really back in its haymaker days in terms of getting civil rights legislation passed, working to close those gaps. You go from a collective community into every man for himself. And that's not how you really keep the system from eating you. And so that type of mentality of really leaving the poor people behind that you grew up with for fame and fortune, you're becoming the oppressor when you were the one who was also oppressed.
Right.
And so that's what I believe is kind of an issue.
And I think kind of some of that kind of comes from the capitalist conditioning that, because capitalism or in the United States, it's all about preaching about individual responsibility, your bootstraps and all of that. So that it kind of bleeds into this. So you make it, and then it's kind of like, well, I made it, and a person who's made it, no one wants to say I made it and I was lucky. It was not because of anything that I do good. The person wants to believe I made it because I did hard work. I did this, I did that. And
it's your pride.
As long as you do that, you're gonna be where I am. But what I always say to that is this. My analogy is with capitalism is with this particular part of capitalism is with work. Let's take that and apply it to work. Let's say there's a management position open. There's 5 sales reps. All of them work their butts off. There's still only one position. So working your butt off doesn't equal necessarily that you're going to achieve the goal, not in a capitalist system, because there's only one manager, for example. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Really the capitalistic system in terms of how it fits race and class as well is, it's a profit motive. I mean, the endless pandering, especially to the working class, I think is really a problem. So, I mean, that's kind of my opinion on it. Did you have like any other question beforehand?
Yeah, I did. I kind of before I moved into this next section. So let's move into the next part of this discussion on class is race. So for those naysayers, that's what this section is going to be. For those who say, there's a certain segment of the left too who believe that our way forward is not to focus on race, but to focus on class. And I don't necessarily disagree with that because I believe class is race. But when you're talking to somebody who's coming from a perspective that class is not race, what is it that they're seeing that we're not seeing with this different perspective, or vice versa? That, you know what I mean? Like, what is it that, what missing information that they don't have to put that connection about class and race should be together? So.
I think in general, just speaking in terms of the establishment. So the establishment, even since America's founding, has always put white working class versus working class people of color against each other. Like in general, the last president to get really a majority of the white vote was Lyndon Johnson in the 1964. And ever since then, after the Civil Rights Act was passed, you had some people, I'm not saying it's all, but a lot of them flipped to the Republican Party. So a lot of people view really the racial issues that, hey, we got civil rights legislation, we got all this, racism isn't as a problem as it was back then versus now. But the establishment has gotten better in terms of hiding its systemic racism. It's not as apparent. You actually have to do a lot of times you have to go through the nooks and crannies to find a lot of the systemic racism issues. And it's harder for us leftists because we have to expose that. And the one who exposes that is always the one who gets beat up on. So it's our disadvantage to help really those who are oppressed, because then we get attacked for it, even though it is the righteous and moral position. So back to your question about like the class issues, my belief on this is that class is race, but it's about too, you work with the white working class, people of color, people of class, because class too, and if you're thinking of it in terms of the economic perspective, it means that individuals who are just as poor as you are, you work with them for your own personal interests. Like, for instance, the billionaire class, like your Oprahs, your Tyler Perrys, all the other billionaires, if they have a son or a kid who's messing up, they're going to help each other out because they're looking for their own interests. They know that, hey, I want to help my friend out because if his kid has offspring and becomes just as financially stable and powerful as his father, that's generational wealth and connections that our kids can have for generations upon generations upon generations. So that's why I believe too that if the working class works in those same ideologies and ways that the billionaire class does in terms of their connections, we could become once more powerful again. Because if we just isolate ourselves and every man for himself, we're going to get picked apart. So I think that's the problem. And the other side of your question about race in general is that I think in general, the class dynamic gets kind of messed up because people don't truly understand how race in America is one of the most dominant forms of oppression in the American society from the founding. We weren't allowed to vote, but we were allowed to declare on the census as 3/5 of a person, just so the Southerners could have representation in Congress, and that was in the Constitution. I mean, there's plenty of other different types of examples, but when we it's hard too, because this is why the American system is so hard to really break up the systemic racism and types of oppression, because race itself was a tool used against people of color. But when you go to white working class people who may not understand race, you have to unpack that issue. You can't just say, "Oh, this is crazy racist," because they'll push back, because that's not what they feel. That's not what they're used to and experienced to. So that's why it's important to have these conversations. And no, you're not the ones that take all the time to say, "Oh, well, I have to teach you everything," but you should have some common ground. And it's specifically about policy issues or issues you want to fix in your community. That's the start. And then that will unlock everything. Because once you start with stuff you agree on and see how you work with this person, it makes the whole race issues, forms of oppression a lot easier. Because instead of like a person who may not agree with you 100% see you as the enemy, they'll see you as, hey, this person's a good person. They're a good human being. They're working hard just as much as I am. And we're both being stuck to by the man. Let's work together. So I think that's kind of.
I have a question to kind of go off of what you mentioned. So if the rural, I would say that wrong, rural white person who doesn't believe race is class, let's say they're poor, what do you believe they feel why they're in that position? You know what I mean? Like, why, if so obviously they're saying it's not race, why they're in this position. So what do they believe, in your opinion, why they're in the position they're in?
Well, the question itself really is it's the different terms of how they've grown up. Like, people who may not believe in race is partly because, I mean, it's not all of them. Some of them aren't racist, but the argument itself is like, I'm just as poor, or I work just as hard. I'm just as oppressed as you are. I don't really see race in that eyes as you are, because look at both of us. That's kind of how they feel.
I can see that. It's like, wait. I'm poor too, and I'm not black. So how it can be, how can it be race, and what people don't understand is capitalists are going to find any way to make sure you're poor and they're rich. So for us, it's black. For them, it's being poor already. Like, you're generationally poor. You know what I mean? Like, the white ruling class hates white poor people almost as much as they hate people of color. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
It's also at a level. There's also levels of poor and also levels of exploitation. So what you just mentioned too about how, you know, the white rich hate the white poor maybe just as much or as people of color. You have to look at too, the reason why race plays a factor is at times it's way easier to exploit poor people of color systemically than even white people of color. It's not saying it doesn't happen. We're just saying there's levels. That's why race exists in America, because there's different levels of oppression in terms of race. Now, in terms of class issues, what I was saying in terms of the oppression, there's not one set of poor. You know, there's poor in which the poverty line defines it, which is bogus. It's not accurate at all. It doesn't at all include cost of. It doesn't at all include like food, groceries, utilities, all that, yada yada yada. And there's also some people who really don't have any money at all. And it also varies between which state you live in, what city, and all that type of stuff. And so I think the best way to talk to individuals about these different type of racial issues is you really got to talk about really your work history, how you started in the beginning with your families. Because I think family, sometimes religion, and workplace is really the three big issues which all connects all Americans. So you have to start off that way to unlock it.
I think a lot of what prevents the naysayers of understanding that class is race is that they, even though they may try to disconnect it, but on a subconscious level, they keep putting class and economics hand in hand. So, for example, a black person can be rich, but if that white officer—
I got to answer this question real quick.
Go ahead.
So there's a question in the comment that's accusing me of appealing to white supremacists. I'm not making those comments. Our host CJ asked me to give the perspective of some of those white working class. I'm not advocating for those type of comments or issues. So I hope that clears it up.
I'm sorry. I thought I mean, maybe the person got on late, but I made that clear. I asked you, what do you think they believe? So clearly, I wasn't asking you for your own opinion. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I'm glad you clarified that. So back to what I was saying. So another example, or another analogy is kind of like when we're talking class and race. It's kind of like with white feminism, or what you would normally call feminism, but I call it white feminism. Is feminism that doesn't take into account any of the issues that black women have because of their color. You get what I'm saying? So it's the same sort of, if you exclude that part of it, then yes, you're not going to have an understanding of how race is classed. If you only make it about economics, then you're going to go, well, there's rich black people, so how can it be? Because it's not only about economics. Until, like what I was just about the point I was trying to make earlier is that a black person could make $30,000 a year, $10,000 a year, or $1 million a year. If the police officer doesn't know who this person is and know his economic level, they're going to be treated the exact same based off of their color. That is a class. That is a category. That is what I mean by race race is class. Or maybe for people to better understand it, maybe I should start saying race is a category, but it kind of takes away the meaning. What are your thoughts though on that last part that I'm making?
Yeah, so you were talking really about white feminism in general, how it can leave out some of the really the systemic and leave out some of the systemic issues, as well as the failure of advocating for issues that women of color struggle with every year. And I think so. If you tune into Jackie's show, Nerdolitics, her latest episode, she talked about this with her friend Meg about white feminism, and we were really talking about the Trump protest back in 2017, which after Trump got elected, there was the Women's March and all this type of stuff. It was created by women of color wanting to advocate some of these issues. And what became problematic is that it went from talking about issues that affect women of color, not being pro-choice. That's one of the examples of the issues. It went from that to, about Donald Trump and his actions, and that was mostly done by a lot of white feminists, and it really liquidized the entire momentum and really the policy issues in which it was going about. So I do think that if you're going to have like racial divides among whatever ideology you have, but I do believe it's important to add every issue on the table that impacts everyone based on color and class to ensure that that movement will survive with the same ideology in which it intended. Because once we allow ourselves to really fall for the capitalistic and American regime's rhetoric, it really divides us, and it really makes it even more difficult on a class level to get some of those policies through that would help us all.
And to your point about people who believe class is the top issue and people who believe race is the top issue, you're on the same team. You shouldn't, there really isn't a disagreement because your end goal is the same. You may think that there's a different cause. And this is to mainly white leftists, like the person today. I don't know if he was a leftist, but white leftists I'm talking to. We both want to eradicate the issues of race and the issues of class. If I believe race is the top and you believe class is the top, it's still eliminating the same issues we want to eliminate. So I'm saying let's not. If you have a gap in understanding that, and it's just something, a bridge too far for you to cross to say, yeah, I understand that race is class. What I'm saying is understand that we don't have to agree about that because it's still the same thing. Because if you're saying class is top and I'm saying race is class, we're saying the same thing. You get what I'm saying, RJ? Like we're saying the same thing. So let's not argue about race and class. Let's go move forward and fight the fight, which is the same fight. What are your thoughts?
Where are you?
Wow, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. That was my fault. I forgot.
My sound
Oh, my fault. I was muted. Oh,
okay,
gosh.
let's hear that again.
Okay, so I think the issue is that people get confused that like class is itself, like we said earlier, only an economic structure, not necessarily a race structure as well. And I think people really get that messed up. And like someone asked in the comments that they missed is like racist class, how so? But began to say that racial issues, people of color really have the exact same type of oppression that really those who are poor. And a lot of times it's intertwined. That's why you have working class people of color. That's why we talk about racial and class issues both being impacted specifically in America, right? And so I believe that in order to eradicate this type of race and class system, we do have to make sure that the policies that we advocate for and the movements that we create and want to spearhead, it not only puts in issues that maybe white working class faces, but also any type of class with the race to make sure that we all come together and find any loopholes in private enterprise and the public sector that may be able to exploit us. So I think having these type of conversations and coming together on really issues, not just the kumbaya stuff, I think that's pretty much important.
Dude, I have another question based on what you said. Do you think that in the name of solidarity. So so we have urban people of color in poverty, and then you have rural whites and some rural blacks that are in poverty that can't seem to understand that they're on the same team, and largely because of a lot of the racial issues. So rural whites may not believe in the same racial issues that urban people of color believe in. So that's to set the question. So my question is, in the name of solidarity, do you think Black folks should allow their issues with along race to be put second, to be deprioritized in order to team up with those people who don't believe that race is the issue? Did that question make sense? Or I can ask it again if it
Well, I hear the question, and see, it's gonna open up another type of.
But you get what I'm saying? It's like Black people are 100 people, and then white people are 150 people, and if we came together, we would be 250, which is a stronger group. But what's keeping us apart is that the group that has 100 people is saying race is number one, and the other group is saying class. That's what's stopping us. So I'm saying, should the group that's saying race is the top issue put that to the back in the name of solidarity to get something done?
No. And the reason why I say that is because if the argument you're making that Black people should deprioritize some of their issues they want in the name of working with a majority, I don't know if that's necessarily the best strategy. Because if you look at it in terms of majority and how it rules, the likelihood of you getting everything you want in your priority is very slim. So I believe you should make that non-negotiable on those specific issues. Like specifically, if you have a lot of those Black issues, those the Black agenda, especially which it entails, those should be mandatory. Because if we're talking about race and class separately and then coming together and how it affects really the American system, if people of color, and it's not just black people, find that there's a systemic issue, that should be a priority. Because once you then fix that, then you get to talk about the class divides in America as well. So we should be able to match the class elements, which we all agree have an issue. But since race specifically in the United States is such a bad issue, we have to bring those together. That's why I believe this conversation is very difficult to talk about, because the United States is one unique, hellish example of this. So the question you phrased is what freaked me out, because it leads into a conversation that a lot of people on the left or people in general want to have in terms of being really a pure class reductionist. And in ways, I agree. But if you take out those racial policies and just stick to the class issues, yes, it would work. But we have to do it. We have to do both of those together, because race and class have always been really the most oppressive force in the establishment in the United States since its founding. So we can't necessarily do one or the other. It has to be both. That's why I think it's hard to really distinguish. And that's kind of my opinion on that.
And to your point, isn't that sort of like what's happening with Democrats? Aren't Black people putting their issues, ending qualified immunity, to the back in order to elect Joe Biden, in order to say solidarity against Donald Trump? Isn't that sort of like what happened? And isn't that what happens all the time? And isn't that the reason Black people can't get anything or hasn't had any progress? It's because that's what we keep doing. We keep saying Black people need this, this, and this. And then what do these white liberals, AKA Democrats, say? Hold on. Right now, let's come together on these things and get elected. Then we can do that later. And it just keeps happening over and over and over and over again. And when I posed the question, I didn't I wasn't even thinking of that until I was hearing your answer, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's exactly what happens with the Democratic Party. What are your thoughts on that particular point?
I mean, yeah, it's like I said earlier. I mean, the last time a Democrat has really gotten a majority of people who are white in this country, who make up really a big majority of the population, was in 1964. And so, too, the population of black people that have been supporting the Democratic Party has been increasing ever since then. And so the issue in general, I believe, white liberals probably have is how can we get more people who are white to stay in the Democratic Party? Because a lot of times it is really a mass exodus to the Republican Party. And this is their perspective, not my perspective, just to preface this. Their perspective is that liberals in general think, well, see, I'm for what you're for. I agree with the systemic racism. But here's the problem. We have to put that on the back burner,
right,
so that we can get white people who may not be as sympathetic to race issues to join the Democratic Party, so we can use their votes, their prestige, and get more politicians like them to then, once upon getting elected, then we can push for those racial issues. But that's completely antithetical to how the political system works. That's using a systemic issue and trying to fix it electorally. But the whole point of electoral politics is you're supposed to hold a politician's feet to the fire to get something for what you want before you vote. Because after you vote for them, all the hope of really getting any of these policy concession eviscerates. So that's why putting all your eggs in your basket for electoralism isn't really the best strategy overall. You have to work with really grassroots organizations. You have to work on the ground level, because that's really the only safe haven and place where you can really garner and keep mass support beyond just the 2 and 4 year election cycle. Because once you finish the 2 and 4 year election cycle, people tune out. They have no interest. But if you can just continue,
like what's happening right now with cable news ratings, I mean, they're literally like plummeting because the election's over and that's it.
Yeah, so I think overall, like, I think it's the best strategy to work with people, work with your own communities. Find and talk to someone you don't always agree with on politics. Find someone that you may not even talk to in your own community and see what their perspective is. Most of the time, you probably have shared goals. It's just the problem is everyone feels so excluded in their own communities. Think of that. A lot of people feel excluded in their own communities because, one, we don't approach people like we used to. We look at them, we stare, we don't wave. A lot of people feel invisible. So when you feel invisible, you're just going to do whatever meets your own interests. But when you do that, you become oblivious to your own class and interests and your own interests of other people in your own community. So you lose that foresight of these shared issues, which could help both of you. So that's why I think it's important to talk to the people you may not agree with, because most of the time you may think, wow, that person may be right on this issue. Maybe we could try to collab on this issue. Maybe our scenarios are similar enough, or I can talk to them and convert them on the issue and make them better. So I think that's a conversation we can have.
Do you think is there any red lines when it comes to teaming up with people you don't agree with everything? This is something the left kind of has this debate where it's kind of like, oh, teaming up with so-and-so? I don't think so in order to get this done. Is there a line? So for example, if in order to get Medicare for all, and we're going completely off topic, but in order to get Medicare for all, let's say we want Medicare for all and this rural population wants Medicare for all, right? But they're against abortion. Do we say, hey, we're not going to team up with them because they're against abortion, even though they want Medicare for all? That is the question that I pose to you. Like, how? Like, that's such a hard question that I find one of the hard questions for people on the left or left-leaning thinkers to answer. Or I get such a broad array of different answers about that question. What is your answer to that question?
Before I give my answer, I want to ask you this question. Are you in? So is your does your question preference on electoralism, or does it preference on movement building? Because that will
great
determine my
question.
answer.
It would change the answer. So, being that when I'm talking to people and I'm getting the answer they're getting, we're talking about electoral politics. Let's look at it from that perspective, man. So electorally, so we want to get legislation passed, right? So we want to get legislation passed. So in a parliamentary system, they have several different, political parties, and different parties team up together for certain issues, and then they're on opposite sides on certain issues. So that's essentially what I'm saying. Is the left, or can you, as a leftist, where is your line? Is it I could team up with somebody for X, Y, and Z if they disagree with me on, war, on, money in politics, on a living wage. Like, what is your red line to say, no, that is like when the Capitol things was going on and Joe Biden was talking about a lot of unity. That was the whole thing. A lot of leftists were saying, I'm not uniting with these racists to do anything. I don't care. We're not uniting if they want it, even if they wanted a living wage. I even saw that. So that's kind of like what my question is.
I think there definitely needs to be lines drawn, and I'm gonna break my answer into two parts. So if you're gonna do it purely political, we're like, this is the fast track way, and this is what a lot of people think. If you want to try it, I mean, not my idea, you would think, because really it's how you get co-opted. So in general, if you want to do the quick and easy way, yes, if there are some issues which you could live with as a trade-off, but it can't be the big fish issues that hurts our movement. Like I explained, me and my friend EQ, we explained this on my show. Look at my latest episode. We talked about leftist movement building, who could be a part of our coalition, whether it's temporary or if it's permanent. And I think this is a good question to have. So like we should have really a litmus test in which how we work with people on a temporary or permanent basis. Like temporary basis, really you can't be racist, you can't be an imperialist, yada yada yada. So in your question,
then that's another question. It's you're not okay with teaming up with racists, but you are okay with teaming up with democratic imperialists. Like it's kind of weird to have that sort of distinction. Like you don't see imperialism as racist. Is that what you don't see? Like a person who has that perspective. Sorry, continue with what you were saying.
I was saying overall, like those type of issues, which is the reason why you shouldn't necessarily team up with those people if they're like that, because it's still supporting that suppressive system. It's just changing the face and making it look prettier. So I do believe, okay, this is a pretty deep conversation, but so I'm trying to preface my answer carefully here. But how the establishment gets away with it?
This is a subject, RJ, that if you don't have the right answer, the left will come for your throat if you do not have the right answer for it. So I get your your hesitation or you're wanting to make sure you get this right.
Because here's the thing though. There's three parts. There's permanent electoralism, that's tribalism, kind of like Democratic Party versus Republican Party. Right. The only difference is that the establishment controls it. It's two sides of the same coin. They believe in the same shit. One's outward about it, the other hides it. Then there's really the movement building, in which the left, we have a certain ideology, the right has a certain ideology. It's a constant push and pull, tug and chase about which wins. So a lot of times they say, oh, the left was prominent in the 30s to the 70s. And some people say, oh, well, the right was prominent in the 80s to really now. And in terms of how you work with individuals who are the complete opposite ideology to try to convert with them on a basis, it all basically goes down to what can you live with and how does it affect the movement overall in the future? And I think that's what type of debates people have in general. So like if you want to work with some of those really really extremists, that's going to be problematic to the movement overall, because then the establishment is going to use that controversial person to co-opt the entire movement and say that's what the entire movement is for and is about. You know,
Right.
so
Right.
there are
kind of what we did with Bernie Sanders calling us Bernie Bros, and we're just vicious online. Sort of using what you're doing to stigmatize them. Yes. Continue. Sorry.
no. Go ahead. I kind of forgot what I was going to say after.
So teaming up. My next question would be: do you feel so online? The most intense battles the left has is with liberals, but vocally, a lot of the policies they claim to believe in align themselves with what we believe on the left, but it's easier to talk to some conservatives and even Trump supporters, but the things they believe in don't necessarily vibe with everything we do. So my question to you is, do you see the left teaming up with liberals in the future? So I'm talking about, the people who stand Nancy Pelosi, who stand, Beto O'Rourke. I know you're a former Beto O'Rourke stan, but who stand these types of Democratic leaders?
My answer to that is this. If you look at really the window of acceptability right now, it's so far to the right. So the left's perspective on this is, I'm not giving a fucking inch. Because if you give an inch or even more and say, okay, I do want to give up a lot of stuff to work with them, that's going to move the window incrementally to the left. But overwhelmingly, the window of acceptability is still so far to the right. And in general, liberals and conservatives are pretty right-wing by nature. One's covert, one's pretty covert, one is outward in terms of really in terms of their imperialism, their being capitalist, all this stuff, yada, 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 racist, and that type of stuff. Now, you have some factions are like that, not all. I'm just talking about really the systemic issue as well. So if you are a leftist who wants to try to work with them, you have to convert them on the left's terms. Like in my current episode, we talked about, okay, if you want to work with this person on this issue, you have to make sure that they're anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, pro-choice, all these type of issues, because they do look out for really the working class more and working people of color. Because if you support capitalism, you support the exploitation of others overseas, you don't want to have women choose what to do with their body. That's not pro-freedom. That's oppression. So I think people overall on the left do want to work with individuals, but it has to be litmus tests and stipulations on who you work with, because then it corrupts the movement overall. It makes it difficult to get prowess.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to segue into the final section. On my episodes, I want to have this section every time I do an episode, and that's just what's happening on Twitter. So what's the latest on Twitter? Twitter beefs, Twitter trends. The last time I looked through my feed, and you may know, has some information on this, DSA, is something happening with DSA again? I saw something that Ryan Knight tweeted out, or maybe one of the Red Berets, because Ryan Knight had it and had the hat on, and the DSA said something. Do you know the latest on any Twitter beef, any Twitter news? What's the latest on Twitter?
Well, there's 3 different types of stuff that happens on Twitter. The first one is, most people don't know this, but Queen of the K-Hive, Hillary Clinton's biggest supporter on Twitter, she came after our co-host Nick and entire FHL. There's a video of her on Twitter basically saying that how Fred Hampton wasn't a socialist. She was saying that if Fred Hampton was alive today, she would slap the dog shit out of all of us for saying that type of stuff. So her name is Shantae Berry. She said the type of stuff. A lot of our Fred Hampton co-hosts and followers and members, they all came after her for that. So that was a big controversy we saw that was really disrespectful and uncalled for.
She got ratio crazy.
Yeah, she got ratio crazy.
Yeah, I saw that.
She's the same lady that put out a hit list about what all like lefty people to go after. Like on that list was like Jimmy Dore, Ryan Knight, Crystal Ball. Nick was on that list. She just named him as socialist MMA. So
8 leftists. You like, there's nothing that leftists believe that anybody disagrees with. Do you want a clean planet? You want higher wages? You want insurance? Like, there's nothing we say that make you upset. Like, why are you? It doesn't make any sense. But so she has a hit list of leftists, and what else about this person?
Yeah, she has a hit list of leftists. She came after Nick on Twitter. She said that friend Hampton would slap the dog shit out of him. Yeah, so that was pretty uncalled for. So she goes after a lot of leftists in general. She's K-Hive to the max. So it was really ridiculous. Yeah, she blocked me on Twitter. So I've been catching the block by a lot of liberals. And
I saw Ben Dixon blocked you. Like,
yeah, he used to follow me and then he blocked me.
You're in the major leagues. I'm not even in the major leagues yet. You're in the major leagues getting blocked by Ben. What did you do to Ben?
Oh, see, it all leads into the next part. So the Twitter beef you were talking about was apparently like DSA was pissed that Ryan wore a hat. You know, well, not DSA in general, like some of the big fish DSA people, like I'm not talking about local or statewide, like this doesn't apply to you, of course. But the whole picture was that Ryan Knight, he was wearing a red beret. And so there's a Twitter account who's a follower of mine, I follow them. She makes a Medicare for All berets. And people buy them just to advocate for Medicare for All, the policy issue itself. And so Ryan thanked her and posted a picture of him on Twitter wearing the red beret. And a lot of DSA people just have a really pure hatred for Ryan Knight that they started going after him. And on Twitter,
they took offense to him wearing the hat, or
exactly.
Anything, wearing that particular hat. Okay.
Right. So they took offense to him wearing the hat. And so they were just one. And so the funniest part to me is I actually kind of like got a viral tweet off of all of this. And it was a conversation between like, what do you say?
No, I saw the tweet, but go ahead. Tell the audience.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find my Twitter name so I could like read it to you.
Okay, for sure.
So there was a tweet that came out which kind of included Brianna Joy Gray. And so one of these like big DSA people basically told Brianna that if you're defending Ryan, you lose your credibility. And Brianna Joy Gray said, this feels disrespectful to the Medicare for All advocates that knitted that hat. Moreover, the obsession with Ryan is weird. That was her response to people who were criticizing him for wearing the red beret hat. So another person, Alex Lawson, she's one of those big DSA people. She said, honestly, defending Ryan really undermines her credibility. And I screen grabbed Bree Joy's final response, and Bree Joy said, I'd rather have integrity than credibility in the eyes of those who have none. And I put on Twitter, 911, I need to report a body, LMAO. And that got like 3,300 likes. I was like, okay, this is crazy. So
yes. Your tweets have a quicker staccato now. It's very quick than what it used to be. But why does DSA hate Ryan? See, this I'm out of the loop with this type of stuff. Like, what did Ryan do to make DSA? Because he used to be a democratic socialist. Is that why he's no longer claiming that? Is that why they're mad? Or what? Like, why do they have a beef with him? Like, do you know where it started or no?
Well, a lot of the beef came off like with Ryan put out a tweet saying that, you know, basically he's kind of skipped over DSA in terms of moving to the left. So it pissed off a lot of DSA people, which, you know, I can understand because I've been through every ideology moving to the left. So I basically know how everyone feels. So at face value, you're basically, you know, it kind of makes people a little bit pissed off saying that, oh, wow, you thought you're way better leftists and you're going to just ditch over this part of the left. It just kind of makes people feel uncomfortable and feels disrespected. So that's kind of how some people feel.
Okay.
And I felt like overall too, like ever since like forced to vote, I guess like some people who are like higher up, especially with the national DSA, like ever since Jimmy found that forcing the vote was actually a DSA strategy for the national, and DSA like kind of national DSA kind of distanced themselves from that strategy itself that came out of their handbook. There's been a lot of hatred from really top DSA people towards like Ryan, because Ryan kind of like defended Jimmy too.
But I hear that it's really just the leadership that.
Yeah, that's what I'm mentioning.
Local, those people are some of the best people and doing some good work. It's just the leadership, and you know, just like with anything, the leaderships of unions are awful. The leaderships of a lot of things that are good or have a good purpose are not necessarily good. So, anything else on Twitter or anything else on this story?
Other than that, I mean, it's just basically the entire Congressional Black Caucus. Well, not really, but some members. You know, like we're talking about like Jim Clyburn, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Tim Scott. They're all kind of saying apparently now that the Democrats are back in the House that racism doesn't exist. But of course, Tim Scott says that because he's a Black Republican. But that was kind of trending on Twitter for a while. But of course, people react to Tim Scott saying that because he's the Republican. It's easier to criticize him for saying racism doesn't exist. But it's amazing the amount of silence from liberals when Kamala Harris, Joe Biden kind of all say the same thing. So that was another Twitter beef. I thought it was
very poetic that when she said that, literally somebody got shot by the police like the day before or in that day. Like it rings so hollow. It's like really, there's no racism. Literally, we just had like in the last 2 weeks, like 4 people shot by the police, like unarmed, and there's no racism. Like I said this before, if your argument is that there's no racism, you're basically saying the condition of Black people is because of their own doing. You're saying nothing outside is causing Black people not to have home ownership. That's causing Black people not to have low credit scores. That's causing Black people to have underfunded schools. It's all Black people's fault. It has nothing to do with racism, and that's to me is just so ridiculous. I mean, police are killing people. Dante Wright, Adam Talib, like they're killing people. Some on camera, but there's no racism. It's just. I don't know who believes that. Like who believes that? You're a little bit more plugged into some liberal reaction, and you're saying it's like crickets, or it's not a rumbling of anything.
Well, it's not. Well, to be more fair, it doesn't come with the same energy that they gave Tim Scott.
Gotcha.
You know, it's not on the same wavelength, not nearly. So that's
sort of like Andrew Cuomo. Like Andrew Cuomo is Donald Trump, but that kind of fades in the background because he's Andrew Cuomo and a Democrat. But he's, being accused of sexual misconduct, killing. I mean, forget about the sexual misconduct. He killed thousands of old elderly people in nursing homes. So, it is what it is. So anyway, that is the latest on Twitter. Is there anything else, RJ, you want to talk about as far as the top news of Twitter? And this
well, the news that came out today was that Facebook, their oversight board for Facebook and Instagram, they've officially upheld their ban on Trump using Twitter and not Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So they kept that ban up. And the reason they cited was because they said Donald Trump's language in which he was tweeting during January 6th definitely incited the riots on the Capitol. And so I guess that was trending.
You're going to use that for everything to keep him silent, because he could if you imagine him tweeting right now, just imagine him tweeting. He will be tweeting and revving up his people. And I just think a lot of stuff would be different. I think the poll numbers would be different because mainstream media is going to cover Trump. Like if he's out talking, they want him because they want eyes viewership. So they're going to cover whatever he's saying. So he's going to be getting free advertisement to speak
what he thinks. And I'm telling you, the Democrats are still deathly afraid of Donald Trump running again in 2024. They're deathly afraid. He got 70 million votes. Like 70 million votes is a lot of people. And they're afraid. That's why they're still attacking him. Like, he's out of office. He doesn't come out and say nothing, but every day there's, oh, well, Donald Trump is still trying to do this, and Donald Trump is still trying to do that, because it's going to be a 4-year attack to try to make sure that this guy doesn't win in 2024. That's my take on that. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think overall the Democrats have figured out that even if our media tools lose half their audience because Donald Trump isn't the gasoline that lights their media fires, it's good for them. Because if you can keep Trump off of social media, Trump no longer controls the social narrative. And politics is increasingly social and not economic. So that's why Donald Trump was able to win and really control the social background for the longest. And so now that Uncle Joe is there, if they can keep Donald Trump out of the social media, it helps Biden not have to respond to his stuff. And because Trump is so spontaneous and you never know what he's going to say, Biden himself, he's an old institutionalist. So he's not used to having to spontaneously respond to the press after something Donald Trump said. Imagine if Trump still had Twitter today and a reporter would have to go ask Biden about it. Biden would give a gaffe. It would make the situation even worse. So
yes, and that's why I'm saying they are working together to make sure because they know what would happen. Imagine if Donald Trump had the same voice. So, but that is going to be coming to the end of this premiere episode of Straight Out of Politics. We're going to always have that segment, what's happening on Twitter. Now, some of the things that are coming up, I'm going to pass it to RJ just in a second to kind of go over what's coming up next for Fred Hampton Leftists. Of course, tomorrow we have our live stream at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. PST, Pacific Coast time. There's Nerdolitics. That's the new show. It's a very, very good show. Make sure you check that show out. I have this new show. This one is called Straight Out of Politics. I'm working on another show with Sky Daddy. You know her on Twitter as Sky Daddy. We're working on a show called Deconstructed. We have, and RJ, so talk about, your show, talk about anything that's upcoming for FHL.
Oh, so my show is the same as always.
Okay.
Instead of it being the RJ show, it's acronymed RJ, but it's actually called Revolutionary Jargon. So it's same time at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 8. I'm actually fresh out of guests. So if you have any people...
Interviews. You went hard at interviews. You got them all done.
Yeah, so if you guys have any suggestions about what I should talk about, who I should bring on to talk about that subject, make sure feel free to personally DM me at Comrade Curls, also through the FHL account too, because I do want to try to have a scheduled list so I can mark that down so I don't have to fish for stuff. I can kind of be more concrete and try to do a lot of prep so I can give you guys really the best direction we should go for the left, because I do a lot of political education, especially on my show. So I've had an anarchist on, I've had an organizer, really a political organizer. I've had someone on foreign policy who was pretty pro-China. We talked about a lot of issues with China as well. I had Margaret Kimberly on. She was great. Individual I was talking about was Danny Haifong. So I've had EQ, Danny Haifong, Margaret Kimberly. I've had Renee. I've had Sabby Sabs. So I've had a lot of different guests to talk about specific issues. So if you have any suggestions for me, let me know. I'll look at them, and I greatly appreciate it because I am freshly out, especially this last minute. So if you can help me get a last minute person, I'll definitely shout you out. So help me out.
Make sure you help RJ out with that. I'm just trying to think. Some of our upcoming guests, if you didn't hear about it on Twitter, Nick is working on getting Cornel West. So fingers crossed, we really think we're going to be able to secure him. If anybody knows Bree, Make sure you tell her we want her on the show. She's one of the few that has not been on the show. Jimmy Dore will be coming up pretty soon. Justin Jackson, I believe, he wants to do a Thursday. I'm not sure this Thursday after our live show or next Thursday after our live show. And I believe that's most of them. I can't think of anybody else that's upcoming. But if you want, go ahead.
So we do have the left's favorite Marxist economics professor doing an interview that just finished an interview. So I'm not going to name that person just in case someone gets mad at me. So you probably know who it is, but we're going to have that person on pretty soon. It'll be released to you guys soon.
Yes, I can't wait for that interview. I would love to have Chris Hedges. So what I was saying, I would love to have Chris Hedges. That's definitely an interview I want to be a part of. So we've come to the end of the episode. That's the announcements. Oh, no, one more thing. Patreon tiers. Can you go over that, RJ? Our Patreon tiers have been updated. We have a Discord now. We almost forgot about that. Can you kind of just give everybody information about that?
Oh, so start first with the Patreon. So we want to thank everyone who donates to us. We just wanted to make sure that all our Patreon tiers are fair. They're all equal. You know, we're socialists, we're communists, we're leftists. You know, we're not capitalists. So any money you give us, we want to make sure we thank you for it, and we want to give you something in reward for it. So we've kind of revamped our Patreon tiers. We go from 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Everyone really gets the same type of benefits, but you can choose how much you want to give us, and we greatly appreciate it. In terms of the Discord now, we've noticed a lot of different media platforms use Discord as a term of really connecting with your viewers off stream. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you go through Patreon, you can, our Discord link is there for Hampton Leftists. We have many different servers in our FHL Discord. Right now, you have Nerdalitics in the FHL Discord. So if there's a specific topic you like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Marvel, DC Comics, yada, 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 you can tune into Jackie's server of Nerdalitics. You can talk about it with her, about different movies and stuff. For my show, Revolutionary Jargon, we can talk about anarchism. You could talk about foreign policy, all that type of stuff. And so each one of us who has a show in FHL will have our own personal show server inside the FHL Discord so that you can connect with us and have different conversations. We also have like an entertainment section. So if you want to talk about food, drinks, all the type of stuff, it'll be like our personal safe haven where we can talk about stuff. And if you join us and like us, you can basically log out of Twitter and just hang in our Discord. So it should be a lot of fun.
How does anybody get an invitation to be a part of our Discord?
It's through Patreon. So if you are a Patreon supporter, you would get that link.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. So thank you, RJ. I now think we have covered everything and all of the new stuff too. Make sure you tune in tomorrow, our live show, and every day we have content coming to you, and every day we're going to continue to bring that content. This is the first episode of Straight Outta Politics. I will catch you guys next week. See you next week.